All right, welcome back. It is Good Vibes time. I'm Martin Falls with Debbie Cox DeNova. She's the transformation coach, and she does a great job at talking to you out there and letting you know how to overcome some things. Today, we're going to talk about overcoming fear. That's probably everybody's got a fear, right?
Everybody's got a fear.
Whether it's snakes or heights or elevators or whatever.
And fear serves us, right? Anxiety actually serves us in certain situations. You don't want to go over a cliff. You don't want to walk down a dark alley in a bad neighborhood. So there are instances where fear is actually really beneficial for us.
Yeah. So how do you do most people learn their fears, or do they inherit their fears?
Yeah. So aside from things like falling from heights, there's one other one. Most of our fears are learned, and it learns through association. Our brain learns through association. So there's something called Hebb's law. Neurons that fire together wire together. And sometimes, again, that's beneficial to our survival and our safety. But a lot of times, we have neurons that fire together and create associations to things that are actually not harmful to us, but our brain and body behave as though they are. And so where that's concerned, we do have agency in actually rewiring ourselves and laying down new neural pathways, but we have to know how to do it. Otherwise, as we've talked about before, we can actually increase the anxiety around these fears. And that's what happens, unfortunately, for a lot of people who try to expose themselves, get brave and expose themselves to something that they know shouldn't actually be harmful to them, but then they do it wrong and they end up reinforcing that pattern again. We talked about that anxiety loop, right? So you go in, you get afraid, maybe you expose yourself too much, you go into the panic zone, and then you're like, oh no, I can't do this. And you go out and the brain goes, oh, that was a close one, right? We should definitely avoid that even more in the future. And so you find yourself in this spiral of anxiety looping that end up going down to depression. So we don't want that.
So the anxiety creates the panic?
The anxiety is actually the body's panic response, right? And again, in certain instances, you want that. But in most instances, I would say for most people, anxiety that rises, for example, giving a speech in front of people or getting on an airplane to fly, or for some people, it's the fear of water or dogs. Okay, we can talk about dogs today as an example. In certain instances, it actually doesn't serve them, and it is actually preventing them from experience life to the fullest. So we can do something about that today. And if at home you have identified a fear in yourself that is disempowering to you, you know that you could have a richer, fuller life if you could overcome it. I want you to get a pen and paper, because I'm going to give you 6 steps in something called the exposure hierarchy that will help you to overcome that. And before I do that, I will say that this information comes from Emma McAdams. And if you are dealing with severe anxiety that is something that is deeply like something from deep trauma, I would highly advise that you seek out a psychotherapist or a medical professional to help you through these steps. Exposure therapy is according to science, the most effective way to handle your fears, your anxieties, and your phobias. But in something called the Anxiety Research Project that was put out by Harvard Brown, it was found that only 19% of therapists actually use it, because they're not all of them are trained for it. So if you find that this work resonates with you, but you feel like you need some extra support, then make sure that you seek out a therapist who is experienced in exposure therapy. There are things that you're going to want to know. For example, if you're on anti-anxiety medication, right? You actually can prevent yourself from experiencing the benefits of exposure therapy when you're on that medication. And the reason that is because you actually want your amygdala to fire in exposure therapy, and you want to wait for that fear response to go down. You're basically teaching your brain it's actually safe to do this. And the more that the brain is exposed to the stimulus and realizes nothing is happening, the more that actually naturally happens. So even though physiological things that we've talked about before for calming the nervous system are really effective in some ways, if you're using them to avoid the exposure to what is the stimulus that is actually safe to you, it actually can increase your anxiety. So
would you say count to 10 on a previous show? 1 or 5? Was it 5 or 10?
You can count down from 5, 4,
Okay.
3, 2, 1,
Yeah,
right?
all
And
right.
but then doing it is the part that's really important,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So if we're using it to avoid, if we're going 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and bringing ourselves to a peace and calm place, but then we're still avoiding, we're actually teaching the brain that is still a threat.
Yeah, you don't want to go 5, 4, 3. Ah! Yeah. My daddy used to say, I'm not It's not the heights that scare me. It's the sudden stop.
Right, exactly, exactly. So if you, for example, have a fear, let's say, for example, as a child, you were bitten by a dog and it was a real injury that happened. And so for the rest of your life, you're when you see a dog coming on the sidewalk, you cross over to the other side of the street, right? And what do we know about that? If you're seeing a dog coming and you cross over to the other side of the street, there is a calm response that happens in the body. But that calm response is actually teaching your brain that actually is the perceived threat is a real risk to your safety and survival. So it's actually not to your benefit to cross over, right? Neither, though, do you want to keep going and send yourself into a panic, right? Because then you're reinforcing the trauma within your body. So what we're going to talk about today is an exposure hierarchy. There are different ways of doing exposure therapy with a psychotherapist. In one way, you're doing a gradual, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And then another one is called flooding. You just put yourself right in there. And you definitely want to be sure and cautious that if you're doing flooding, that you're doing it with support from a professional, as it can re-traumatize you and increase your stress and
Could give
fear
you a
and
heart
anxiety.
attack.
It could. Yes. So we will be talking about the 6 steps. But the first thing I want you to do is to write down a list of all your fears and pick one. Pick one that you want to work with through this process.
How many times I've been on this news desk and people who public speak all the time and do things come up and they go, "We're live." Well, sometimes we're doing hurricanes and different things we are. But they go, when you say, "No, we're not live," they go, "Thank God."
Yes.
Okay, well, we're still doing the same thing, but it's the fear of live.
Right, absolutely.
Control.
Because if it's outside of their own experience of safety, it will occur as a threat, even if it's kind of sort of the same sometimes. So that would belong on their fear list.
Okay.
Right? So at home, hopefully you've created a fear list and you've picked one that you want to work with. I'm going to use the example of a dog. So you've been bitten by a dog as a child. You've been avoiding dogs all of your life. You've increased that fear response within your body. And now you're a grandmother, a new grandmother, and you want to go see your grandbaby, but your daughter has a dog in the house and you haven't visited yet because of the dog in the house. So let's just say that, for example, you say, okay, fear of dogs, I'm taking it on now. So you write that, you make sure you pick that one. Step 2 would be make a personal goal around that. Okay, so visit the grandbaby at the home where the dog is would be a really good goal, right? Number 3, you want to build a fear ladder. So this is that hierarchy of exposure. Now, this is really important because in exposure therapy, what you're doing is you're breaking this down into small, digestible chunks where you're exposing yourself just a little bit, teaching your nervous system it's totally safe, it's a little bit safe, it's safe, and you keep on going, okay? So we're going to create a list of things that you maybe, seeing dogs on the sidewalk is a fear. Walking by the dog park, that's a fear. Going to someone's home, that's a fear. So it's important that you put a mix of mildly anxiety-inducing things to moderate to things that seem completely out of reach, okay, on the list. And then you're going to rate them on a scale of 0 to 10. Now, in psychotherapy, there is something called a SUD score, okay? And so this is basically a subjective unit of discomfort score from 0 to 100. So we're going to do something like that, 0 to 10. 0, I'm not afraid of this at all. 10, it is completely anxiety inducing. You're going to rate each thing on that scale, okay? And then you're going to put it on a ladder of sorts that goes from down at the bottom is the least scary all the way to the top. And we're going to work from the bottom up, okay? Number 4, this is where the rubber meets the road. You're going to actually have to face your fears. But you don't want, as the grandmother, to go straight into the home with the dog, because if the dog jumps on you to say hello, that could be the traumatizing event that has you never go into the home
Heaven forbid
again.
the dog bites you.
Right, exactly. So this is really important. But first of all, when you're doing this, you want to make sure that you are creating safe environments for yourself. So if you are dealing with anxiety for a dog, you definitely don't want to put yourself around dogs who have been known to bite or who are kind of iffy, right?
Right.
So facing your fears, starting at the bottom, maybe the first thing is to watch videos of dogs. So you're just safely at your home watching videos of dogs on a loop, actually getting in there and witnessing that. Maybe step 2 is walking by the dog park, okay? Just walking past the dog park. You don't want to go in an off-leash park yourself just yet, but you're walking by and you're kind of feeling into it. Again, this is want to say this. It's important if you're feeling anxiety, this is actually normal, and for exposure therapy, it's actually needed. You actually need your amygdala. This is why benzodiazepines are not good, okay? Because you actually need your amygdala to fire in order for the brain to lay down new neural pathways about this specific activity. So if you feel anxiety, you're totally normal. Just breathe through it and keep walking. Then you're going to turn around and you're going to walk back past the dog park. You're just going to increase the frequency and the duration. Then maybe the next step on the ladder is to stop at the fence and just look at the dogs. Maybe you look at the dogs for 1 minute. You set a limit. What you want to make sure is that you're not setting a limit of until I get too anxious or until it makes me too scared. No, you want to at least wait until the anxiety reduces by half. If you do that and then you leave, then you've done a good job. If you do that, if you leave before that point, you will reinforce your trauma. You will go in the car and you'll be like, oh, I escaped that. And then you're probably not going to want to do it again because your brain has now rewired, this is not safe for
Isn't
you.
a lot of it irrational sometimes?
It is
I could
irrational
hold a
at times.
snake. I could grab an alligator. Don't put a cockroach by me.
Exactly. Okay. So exactly. A lot of it is. And look, if it's working for you, then you don't have to take it on. We're only talking about fears that are disrupting the quality of your life. If you find that you
A
are
cockroach will.
Yes. If you find that your fear of cockroaches is disrupting your life and you want to actually work on it, this is a great way to do it.
Yeah.
And what you're going to do is you're going to repeat that rung on the ladder over and over until it feels like okay. So for example, if you're afraid of swimming, drowning and swimming, you might start by just putting your feet in a pool and just sitting there until the anxiety reduces. Then you get up to waist high. That's the next rung. And then you get up to here. Then you put your face underwater and back up again, right? And before you know it, you're swimming and you're actually finding that you enjoy it. So you're sort of easing yourself into it, but it is extremely important that you commit 100% if you're going to do this, because what will happen is your anxiety and your fears will rise when you're exposed. And what you're going to want to do, and this is where people mess up the most, you're going to want to run away. And you're going to want to say, never mind, I'm not doing this anymore. And that's where people get messed up and they actually reinforce instead of helping themselves get out of
That's
it.
some great advice. We got to talk more about that because a lot of people have fears,
Yes.
especially public speaking. I hear people all the time talking about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then make sure steps 5 and 6 repeat. Number 5 is repeat it over and over again and extend the length. And then number 6 is to reinforce that you're being courageous. Don't compare yourself to other people. Congratulate yourself for the efforts that you're making to overcome a fear of yours and just keep going.
And real quick, if you look at most CEOs, I was telling Phyllis Peoples the other day, I'll watch her get up and give speeches sometime. She's an incredible speaker.
Yeah.
I don't know if they learned how to do that or if they just inherited that, you know?
Yeah.
So you got to find your own even-keeled approach.
Absolutely.
All right. Great show.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be back next week.